Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We've got a special edition of the Sitdown. Very honored and appreciative to be having Marco D'Amico. He's the editor and founder of scrimmageandstats.com. So if you're looking to get all your prospect information, NHL draft information, be sure to check out scrimmageandstats.com. Marco will keep you filled in with all the latest of all different prospects, the upcoming draft, you name it, he's got you covered. Marco, thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's a pleasure, man. How you guys doing?
We're doing good. Obviously, today I want to talk a little bit about the Habs and just kind of the direction of the team. And they've got a lot going on right now. And I guess I wanted to kind of pick your brain and get some thoughts on the state of things. I guess, today's obviously another news day. We've got Nick Bobrov and Vinny Lecavalier, the announcement that they're going to be joining and, helping out the team. What do you think of that move in particular? I know Vinny's going to be still kind of working from Tampa, but Nick's got quite the experience. What are your thoughts?
I mean, I think I like where it's going. Obviously, a lot of people will look at Bobrov and be like, well, as European picks didn't all pan out with New York. And, Kravtsov's still in Russia. Lundqvist isn't producing like we thought he would. And Capo Caco is taking his sweet time to establish himself. So, what has he really done? I understand that, but at the same time, the Canadiens needed a new director of European scouting with Christopher Rockstrom set to retire. And outside of Lehkonen and maybe Ullinen with the Canadiens haven't really produced good European NHL players either. So it's not like they're going from bad to worse. They're just trying something new. And what I like about Bobrov is he always goes for the high-end talent. It's not safe picks that he goes for. So it's not the same generic, Jacob Delarose of this world where it's the prototypical bottom six big winger or center or the stay-at-home defenseman that they go for. I think Bobrov is going to help bring about a new philosophy in drafting. When it comes to Vinny, I mean, Vinny will be to Hughes what Scott Niedermayer is going to be with Verbeek. And that's basically just that senior counsel. And we see it time and time again. And, I think that Lecavalier, it'll help him kind of be in the fold. And I appreciate that for a guy like him that has the Canadiens at heart, even though he never played for them. He is definitely someone that I could see bringing about a certain level of intrigue, because Hughes is going to probably have him on to talk about the player's perspective, to talk about skills development, to talk about what he went through as himself as a young player through a rebuild. Because let's not forget, this is a guy who came in, at 18, fresh, first overall pick to the Tampa Bay Lightning, and they were going nowhere quick. So he knows what it's like to be a young player in that setting. So I can kind of, I do understand. I think a lot of people are just worried about this becoming a kind of a country club setting. My answer to those critics, simply put, this is the NHL. It's a league of country clubs. The only thing is you need to make sure that those that you surround yourself with are individuals of high value, talent, and character.
Now, what kind of message do you believe this is sending to the fan base by adding Nick Bobrov today, that the team's going to be investing a little bit more heavily in the European scouting where they didn't in the past?
I think scouting in general, I think they're just going to expand that. It's just when you look at where they are right now, Bobrov is unemployed, so it's okay to go ahead and get him. But a lot of the scouting world is busy right now at work. We've reached, or we're beyond the halfway point at this point. The draft's in 5 months, less than 5 months. So it's not like you can go and pluck away a scout from another team. You won't be able to use any of the intellectual property they've gathered over the last year to help you with your draft anyway, because that belongs to the team as long as they're under contract with that team. So there's no point in going to pluck anybody. They brought in somebody they knew that could help right now. I think from a scouting perspective, you'll see the biggest ads this summer after the draft. Once everyone's cleaned their hands of the 2022 draft and you're able to kind of go where you want, there's a few guys to watch out for that I think the Canadiens are going to kind of hone in on, because I think they had something like 8 scouts in total, or 9 scouts in total as of last year. And that's simply just unacceptable, especially if you're a rebuilding club. You need to have well over a dozen if not more. And none of them part-time. The Canadians had a few that were part-time. That to me is unacceptable. You need, if you're going to have many picks over the next 3-4 years, you cannot afford to miss. You need the most amount of information and the most amount of eyes.
With the Tyler Toffoli trade this week, what was your opinion on the return? I mean, I saw a lot of different mixed opinions. That's one of those ones where the key to that's going to be Heineman. And then obviously where the Habs go at the draft. What are your thoughts on the deal?
I mean, it's a prototypical deal for that kind of a player. I think a lot of people have an emotional attachment to Tyler Toffoli. I feel also like the beginning of last season for Tyler Toffoli, where he had those 10 goals in 9 games, I think skewed the situation a bit in terms of what people thought he was. I think a lot of people were ready to put him in the same category as a Max Pacioretty with the Canadians, who was like a 60-plus point winger on a consistent basis. Tyler Toffoli is a 50 to 55 point winger that could probably pot you 25 goals. That's generally what he's going to do. That's his career average. And to get a first, basically Hughes said the price was a first, a second, a fifth, and a cap dump. And rather than get one of Calgary or Florida's second round pick, both going to be, later picks. They went for the proven asset, or more proven asset than the unknown in Heineman, because Heineman has a very high floor. Everything he does screams at worst bottom 6 player. The question now is whether or not the shot, the skating, the skills translate to an offensive role in a top 6 setting, or if it's more a complementary scoring role on the third line. But again, I feel like a lot of people made assumptions of what they would be getting for Tyler Toffoli based on, a lot of hype and months to think about this. I think there was a market for Toffoli, but you also have to keep into consideration, like, there are a lot of other rentals that are going to be getting first round picks. You're not going to be holding teams by the balls to get a first round pick and more this year. And I understand, like, they didn't have to move Tyler Toffoli, and I do understand that a lot of people think they could have possibly gotten more had they waited. But I think there's going to be a couple of first round picks flying around in the next 2 weeks, and the market would have gotten really tight really quick. And the other thing to keep in mind is that Tyler Toffoli wanted to go to 2 places if moved, only 2. And the Canadians were willing to help him out with that and spoke to Los Angeles and Calgary. Calgary because of Daryl Sutter and because he's got teammates there, and LA because that's where he was drafted. They got him into Calgary, and they got him the offer they wanted from Calgary. And apparently Ben Chiarot was supposed to be included in that deal too, but apparently the Canadians were too greedy, and rightfully so. Would have required a top-level prospect to compensate for the difference. And I get it. So to me, I think it's a fair deal. I don't think it's a great deal. I don't think it's a bad deal. I think it's a fair deal. And a lot of people will say, yes, but Calgary got the better player. Absolutely. But Calgary is also playing Toffoli on their third line. It's not like they went and acquired the savior. They went and acquired a piece. We, and people in the market in Montreal viewed him as a savior. And that spoke, in my opinion, to the lack of offensive depth on this team, which is the reason why they're rebuilding in the first place. So on a regular team, to remember that Tyler Toffoli started on Montreal's third line and second line. And the reason why he went on Montreal's first line and was a first line player in Montreal is because Montreal's left wing depth is atrocious and continues to be to this day because Jonathan Drouin is consistently injured. And now Mike Hoffman is trying to fill those shoes. So Heineman fills a need in the organization in terms of big, fast left wing prospect. They don't have many of those. But again, this is a futures deal, and anybody calling it the day of the trade is going to look just as silly as the people that were calling the Fleischmann and Dale Weiss trade for Phil Deneau and a second round pick, which became Alexander Romanov. And we now know how that went. And I think that was a pretty damn good trade.
What is your opinion on the prospect or Emil Heineman and like his ceiling and so forth? I mean, how familiar, when his name came up in the trade, how familiar were you with him?
To the detriment of a lot of people, I actually did know who he was, which surprised a lot because they're like, no, that can't be. Like, yeah, no, I remember him in his draft year. Mm-hmm. He reminds me a lot of a Josh Anderson in terms of that power forward, straight line player with a shot. I wouldn't expect like insane creativity. I wouldn't like individuals that think, we were supposed to get a guy like Peltier. Peltier from Calgary, for example, is going to be a bottom six player, in my opinion. I think he's going to be that kind of a tweener as well. It's similar potential. It's just he's more sure to reach that point than a guy like Heineman. What I like about Heineman is that, he's a goal scorer first and foremost, and he's got a good amount of goals for very little minutes. Like in the SHL, he's one of the most efficient goal scorers at his age, and even further. So I like the tools that are there, but I like the fact that, you're going for a prospect that's already had development. Like you're going to want guys that are going to be able to come into your lineup next year, the year after, that are going to be given the opportunity, because as we see, they're trading even the players that they don't need to trade, they're trading. So that tells me that there's going to be a complete and total turnover sooner rather than later.
What do you believe will be the next domino to fall? Will it be Ben Chiarot, Jeff Petry, Christian Dvorak, or do you see something else brewing?
Ben Chiarot I don't think Ben Chiarot is a Montreal Canadian in March. I think that's going to happen. A team is going to get desperate. Calgary started the ball, right? And I feel like it's going to depend on the conference. I think the Western Conference is starting to get active because Calgary made the first move. But I think the Eastern Conference is still kind of sleeping because there is no race for the Eastern Conference playoff spots. I think it's pretty much already all in the bag. The West, on the other hand, a lot of people still jockeying for positions. You have Anaheim, LA, Edmonton, Dallas, all in a race for those last two wildcard spots. So it's going to be interesting to see how the arms race works. And I think Ben Chiarot, to me, there's a lot of Eastern Conference teams they're chomping at the bit. I think he might wind up in the West. I think St. Louis makes a lot of sense as well, especially if the Canadians are looking for prospects. I think New York or St. Louis. We've heard about Florida as well. Florida doesn't have a 2022 first. I doubt they would give even a protected 2023 first at this point, but it would probably be a prospect again, like an Owen Tippett or a Denisenko. So again, it's all up in the air, but the three teams I've heard of for Chiarot are St. Louis, Florida, and New York.
What do you believe the possibility of Jeff Petry ending up with the Red Wings is? And the reason I ask that is, he's got family ties to the area. He grew up in Michigan. I see a bit of a match there with the Wings having some movement on defense with some of the free agents they got at the end of the year. Do you see a fit at all with Jeff Petry going back to his hometown?
It's tough because we know they have interest, but they're not interested in the full cap hit. And it's like, okay, well, if the Canadians do retain even $1 million, say like $1 million, it's 3 years long. Canadians aren't going to need that $1 million, to be completely honest with you. Like if you already have Price and Weber that are going to be on LTIR for the next 5 years before their contracts expire, you won't necessarily need to worry about the cap space because you'll be able to go beyond the salary cap. So I can understand that. And if it means the deal is sweeter, and we know that Detroit has quite a few prospects that would be of interest, it could make sense. The only thing is they have Moritz Seider and then Philip Hronek 1 and 2 on the right side, which to me is a red flag because you have two young guys. Are you going to bring in Petry to play on your third pair, or are you going to knock down a guy like Hronek? So that doesn't make too much sense to me, especially for a rebuilding club. Dallas makes a ton of sense. Okay. You talk about him being from Michigan. His wife is from Texas, and probably wants to be in a market that they're comfortable with. Jim Nill used to be the assistant general manager in Detroit when they were extremely interested in him at trade deadline, but Montreal ended up getting him, and they were going to give him an offer as a free agent, but Montreal ended up blocking him down. And Jeff Petry played hockey with Jim Nill's son. So there's a whole lot of connection there. And it just so happens that Detroit is the Stars are in the playoff hunt and are probably going to trade Heiskanen, good Lord, no, Klingberg, who happens to be an aging right defenseman. So I could see a trade with Dallas making a ton more sense. They trade somebody like Klingberg and then flip some of those assets for Petry, even if it's retained slightly. Like if you can get a first round pick and a prospect for him by retaining $1 million and a half, you do it. You don't ask questions. Your financial structure, like if that 1.5 million is going to be a problem for you in the next 3 years of a rebuild, then it's your fiscal planning that's the problem, not Jeff Petry being retained on.
Now yourself, you're in the Montreal area, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
What is the vibe around the team right now with all the different moves? Dom Ducharme being out, Marc Bergevin, obviously no longer with the team. Has the mood in the city changed and people feel a little bit reinvigorated, or just, they're embracing the changes right now, or are people taking a wait and see approach?
All of the above. And I think fans are taking a wait and see approach. I think the fan base has been asking for a proper rebuild for a long time. I think the Canadians have been doing a patch job that's been, I guess, enabled by the fact that Carey Price has basically put this team on his back for the better part of a decade. And that's allowed them to shield a lot of the holes in their roster construction. And this could be their defense most recently, and this could also be the lack of center depth over the last 15 years. And, it's telling that the one time they reached the Stanley Cup final, Carey Price finally has help offensively with Nick Suzuki, with Cole Caulfield, with Tyler Toffoli, et cetera. So if Carey Price is no longer in the fold or cannot come back to what it used to be, and Shea Weber effectively retired, you have no choice. Like, a rebuild is staring you in the face because your core pieces are done. To me, as from the fans' perspective, there's hopeful optimism because this is something that a majority of the fan base has been asking for. The media is unfortunately the one going absolutely bonkers right now, enraged entirely, like just from top to bottom, especially the certain conservative French media outlets, just, railing on every single decision. Like today, just Bobrov being hired and a lot of them being like, why couldn't it be a French Canadian head scout? And it's like, well, Martin Lapointe is sharing duty with him and he happens to be French Canadian. So there's that. The talking about Hughes's appointment as GM and him not being Quebecois enough, some of those discussions. So like, there are obviously old tropes that some media members will go to. Thankfully, the grand majority of the media in Montreal has been utterly professional about this and informative to fans in terms of rebuild and direction. And I think there's a lot of optimism because for a long time, this is an organization shrouded in secrecy. Marc Bergevin had the communications locked down more than, I would argue, some authoritarian governments across the world. Like, no information got out. If you claim to have a leak out of the Montreal Canadiens between 2012 and 2021, you were full of it because it never left the room. Whereas Kent Hughes and Jeff Gorton are, in the last month alone, have been interview left and right, completely open. Their press conferences are completely transparent. Like, they literally came out and said, if we get the deal we want for Ben Chiarot, he's being traded. If we get the deal we want for Jeff Petry, he's moving. You would never have heard that from Marc Bergevin before. So a lot of people take that openness, that dialogue, the clear idea of where things are going without necessarily naming it a rebuild. I think we can all read between the lines. I think that clarity is what has gained the confidence and the goodwill of the Montreal Canadiens fans.
I can only think of one time during Marc Bergevin's tenure that I noticed a leak. And that was when they obtained Ben Scrivens, because there was a couple media outlets in the West that were reporting it. Other than that, like, I agree with you. There's no
leak out of Montreal. It's always whom they're trading with, always whom they're talking to.
That was the only time I can recollect a serious leak, and it did happen within 24 hours, where it seemed like some media members, somebody, like you said, on the opposing side, started to leak the information, but there was never a leak inside the fortress at the Bell Center. It just wasn't happening. Your early impressions of Marty St. Louis and just kind of, how he's helped Caulfield's game, and do you think he might be the long-term answer?
I think there's still time for Marty St. Louis. I think that it's early. I like the way he talks about the game. I like the way he thinks the game. I think that for the longest time, you know, the Canadians have been picking up these coaches that have come through the queue. And when you play in the queue in JHL, it's a certain style of play. There's a certain mentality of the way they play. And I'm not saying it's all bad. There's great coaches that come from there. But one of them is that they're sticklers for systems. And the systems in the queue don't actually ever work. It's one of the biggest knocks on them is that there's a lack of defensive acumen. And the illusion of defense is kind of maintained by this idea of structures and playing through a system that they have. And I like that Martin St. Louis views it more as a concept and playing man-to-man instead of boxing, instead of zone defense and stuff like that. Like, it's clear to me that an offensive-minded person is running the strategy now. And you can tell when they're on the ice because they're playing man-to-man. The center isn't playing so deep into the zone anymore. They're counting on the defenseman to move, but the wingers coming down a little further. Whereas before it used to be the center in the middle or down low and the wingers waiting at the blue line. That simply is not going to get you far. And so you're already seeing small changes. When it comes to Cole Caulfield, I don't think that Martin St. Louis has done anything directly to Cole Caulfield's game that has made it any different. I think the difference is that unlike Dominic Ducharme, the moment Caulfield showed any inkling of fire or in-game momentum, he didn't take it away from him for the notion of, I got to give this veteran ice time. He rode that kid. And I'll give you a perfect example. Martin St. Louis' first game. Cole Caulfield had been removed from the first power play away for the last 20-odd games. And puts him right back out because he was having solid shifts in the first period, puts him back out in the second period, boom, goal. It's as simple as that. And then what does he do? He continues that momentum the next game, puts Caulfield on the first line with Nick Suzuki. Keeps that momentum going, boom, goal. Last night, he was all over the ice, was one of probably the best forward on the ice, 20 minutes in the game, career high. Riding youth and giving them more legroom to maintain that momentum and build confidence. That is a sign of a skilled player imparting on his young players what happened to him. Because that's what Tortorella did to St. Louis. St. Louis would egg him for ice time. And that's what allowed him to rise through the ranks, is because when St. Louis said he was going to do it, he was given an inch, and he forced the coach to give him a foot after, because he was just so good when given that inch. And I feel like that's the rope he's going to give to these young players, these talented young players, as opposed to immediately punishing them or stunting their momentum for the notion of strategy or for the sake of playing safe.
One player I wanted to mention before I forget, Jonathan Drouin. Do you believe he has a future in Montreal, or do you think he's, when they're kind of making the list of players that are untouchable or part of the future, do you see him as part of the future, or do you see him getting a ticket out of town?
I see him as part of the immediate future. I see him, if he moves, I think he's a deadline deal in 2023.
Okay. Now yourself, as far as evaluating upcoming prospects and the draft being, a few months away, Shane Wright's still number one in your books? There's nobody even close?
Close, yes, but he's still number one. I think a lot of people thought it was cool to kind of remove him from number one, but I think that that's doing a disservice to the evaluation of the player. Shane Wright had not played any hockey last year. None. Zilch. There's a reason why the OHL doesn't have many people at the top, even though I think they should. And you're going to start seeing it throughout this second half of the season. The players in the OHL that didn't get to play last year are going to start rising and rising and rising. And we're talking about Shane Wright. There's Ty Nelson, who was the first overall pick 2 years ago in the OHL, who's probably, a lot of people are sleeping on him. He's going to be a first-round pick. Delbel Belouz is probably going to be a first-round pick. Owen Beck is probably going to be a first-round pick. And these are guys that weren't on the radar very much up to 6 months ago. Why? Because the OHL is finally getting to play. So these people are all catching up. And it's no coincidence. Shane Wright has 33 points in his last 20 games. He started slow, but he's well over 1.5 points per game in the last little bit. And he's just taking off. And I feel like a lot of people that were down on him at the beginning of the season, when we were saying patience and look at what's going on the ice, because it's not just points performance. He is such a mature player that if it wasn't for that lost year I would say without a shadow of a doubt, he's going to be on a top 6 next year in the NHL. The problem is that lost year of development. And this is a problem that a lot of folks in Canada are going to have to deal with, because yes, the WHL played last year. Yes, the QMJHL played last year, but those weren't normal seasons. It was stop and go tournament style. It's not the same. And that, I feel, affected their overall growth. And that's why you're seeing a lot of people take off now. You had a lot of guys start strong, which was usually the European players, right? You look at Joachim Kamel, you look at Juraj Slavkovsky, who's the leading goal scorer of the Olympics. You look at Simon Nemec, David Jiricek, all Europeans, which is a reason why if you look at the top 10 on most lists, most of them are European, because they have more data to go on. Their seasons were basically unaffected. If you look at another guy like Matthew Savoie played in the USHL last year. He played in the States because he didn't feel like waiting for the WHL. So there's a lot of data on him, and he didn't miss a beat, which is why he started the season so strong and flew up the rankings. I had him at number 2 in January. Now he's closer to 3-4, but it's definitely, you see the difference. And now Shane Wright is taking off. Like his last, I believe, 4 or 5 games, he's got north of like 15 points. He's doing really well and gelling well at a time where a lot of his teammates are injured. Like Martin Chromiak, the LA Kings prospect, who's the best goal scorer on the team, is injured, and he's still going crazy with Arcuri, which is hilarious. He makes those around him better, and anybody who listens to the broadcast, the Kingston Frontenac's announcers will tell you, he does so many little things right that the offense, and pun intended, but the offense will come and is coming. And I think it's going to be undeniable. As we get further into the spring, I think it's going to be a no-brainer. It's going to be him number 1, Cooley number 2, and then the fun begins at number 3.
Now yourself, whereabouts are you with your own mock drafts? How many have you done? Can you talk a little bit about what you've got going on right now with scrimmagestats.com?
Yeah, well, I did one. I do a mid-season mock or a mid-season ranking. I save the mock drafts for right before the draft.
Okay.
The mid-season ranking, top 32. So I did it first week of January because we were all locked down here in Quebec and had absolutely nothing to do. So I wrote it all out. I should be doing another one basically in April after the trade deadline. Take your time to do the lay of the land and then obviously write something out. And then probably after the U18 championships in May, so sometime in June, would be kind of the final list, which is what we do on a yearly basis. So that's the way I view things. But like, again, things are so fluid, and it's not how much you get to watch a player, but the quality of what you get to watch. So like the Olympics, for example, were an eye-opener for a guy like Slavkovsky. It helped me evaluate Simon Nemec, who is seen by many as the top defenseman of this draft. The U18s are going to help. The CHL playoffs are going to help. The NCAA Frozen Four tournament is going to help. So now we're really diving into clutch performances. And this is where guys take off. You look in the past, like Mason McTavish, 3rd overall pick last year. He was ranked around 12, 13 at this point in 2021, but exploded up the ranks because he had a fantastic U18. So you have to like hone in on these guys. And this is the most exciting part, is the second half, because scouts look at progression and they try to project the potential of a player based on that progression line. So you know what they've done in the beginning. How do they take their first half of the season and improve on it? And those guys that usually start taking off in the second half are the ones that have the steepest progression curve. And that's why you see a lot of risers in drafts, in draft rankings, because they have exceptional second halves. And we see it all throughout the history of drafts. You look at Barkov was basically that. Started off like 1 or 2 months slow and then just burnt the Finnish Liga to the ground. You look at the last couple of years, like for example, there was Tim Stützle that exploded on the scene in 2020. Everybody thought it was Mason Raymond going 3rd overall, and he ended up sliding. Sanderson as well. That nobody saw Sanderson coming. He just shot up the ranks. And so that's why a lot of scouts are paying attention right now, because yes, some of these players had ruined developmental seasons last year, or less than ideal developmental seasons last year. But for the most part, it's been close to normal this year. Like Quebec the QMJHL is the only one that shut down for a month. Everybody else has just been keeping going. So they're going to be paying attention to everyone's second half, because unlike last year, they're going to have a lot of data to work on.
That was a hell of a segue into my next question. Is there a player or two that you're really watching as a potential big riser, or somebody that you're thinking is going to be really making a huge jump potentially in the first round? So that was, like I said, that was a hell of a segue you just went into.
Definitely Logan Cooley's teammate, Frank Nazar.
Okay.
It won't be a surprise if you read my rankings, because I have him firmly in my top 10. But this guy is outpacing in terms of points Logan Cooley. Just an exceptional stick handler, great skill, exceptional vision, and he's proving to people that he has quite the goal scoring ability as well. It's his frame. He's a smaller guy, reminds a lot of people of Patrick Kane, the way he plays. Doesn't necessarily have Patrick Kane's top end speed. I would say he's an above average skater, but I wouldn't say he's like Kane elite level skating. And I think that's the difference between the two. This is a guy that's going to be in the top 10 by the end. By the time all is said and done, he may be even pushing top 5. And I like a lot of people are sleeping on him, but I think a lot of people have come to notice him since January. And he has been the best player, in my opinion, for the U.S. national development team, with Cooley really driving the bus. And the U.S. national development team is going to have quite a draft this year, similarly to 2019. Maybe not the same quality, but the same quantity. They're probably going to have 5 or 6 first-round picks. So it's going to be good for them. Another guy that not a lot of people are talking about that's probably just going to soar right up the rankings is Pavel Mintyukov. He's a Russian player currently playing in the OHL, and he's a defenseman, but he's really fun. He kind of plays like a forward at times, that rover style that we liked, but a very mature player, which is interesting. And I like the fact that you're seeing more and more Russian defensemen come over to the CHL to develop, because as we know from watching, guys like Alexander Romanov, Shakir Mukhamadullin, development as a defenseman in the KHL is not ideal. They don't allow you to express yourself as offensively. And that's why you had guys like Provorov, Sergachev, Kulikov come over here and play. Mintyukov is one of those guys where he's just all over the ice. His skating is above average to really good. And then you throw in just great puck skills and eye for the net. He's already, if I'm not mistaken, in Bob McKenzie's rankings, I think he's already in the teens. And I think I like him there. A lot of people were sleeping on him before you had someone like Bob McKenzie call out his name. And I feel like this is a guy, along with the WHL's Denton Matejchuk, these are going to be 2 guys to watch out for on the defensive end that may rise, because you have Nemec, Jiricek, and then there's going to be a push for defensemen right after.
Perfect. I appreciate you taking time today to interact, answer all these different Montreal Canadian questions, along with your insights and so forth on the upcoming draft. So again, check out Marco D'Amico, scrimmageandstats.com. He's got you covered for all the latest prospects, so be sure to check him out.